Right, we are going to be painting our clay project. So your project has been fired one time in the kiln, and now it is a piece of bisqueware, and now we're ready to paint. So what we're going to do to begin with is create just a base layer of paint with black India ink. So at your tables, you're going to see a tray that has these individual black cups and then these flat brushes that you're going to use. Please be careful when you're using this ink. It does stain your clothes, so if you want to wear an apron, then put an apron on. But carefully take that lid off, and we're going to keep that lid to use when we're done painting to put it back on the cup. So what you're going to do is just paint a solid layer of black on the surface to begin with. And what that is going to do is it's going to sink down into the carved areas that came from the stamp. So the lowest areas of your clay are going to stay black. And then what you're going to decide is a metallic paint color to put on the surface. So you're going to want to paint everything one solid coat of black, and this is called India ink, and India ink spreads really easily into the surface of the clay. But you might need to kind of tap the top of the clay with a paintbrush to get that ink down in the crevices. And then when your brush starts to get dry, then just dip it in the paint again. And you want to fill the entire surface of the lid and even the sides of the lid. You're also going to want to paint, because when your lid is sitting on your box, you are going to see the sides. So you're going to want to turn that and start painting the sides as well. Now, you don't need to do the bottom of the lid because nobody sees the bottom of the lid anyways. And that way it has a surface that it can sit on top of. So what you're working on top of is your project board and a piece of wax paper. The wax paper is going to act like a tablecloth to keep the paint off the board. And the reason why we paint on top of a board is so that you can carry your project to put it back on your shelf without touching wet paint and leaving fingerprints in the paint. So make sure your project is on that wax paper on top of the board. And then once you finish getting the entire surface painted, then move on to painting the walls of your box. So everything is going to get one solid coat of black to begin with. And this ink dries fairly quickly. So I'm going to set this off to the side now that I've got all that edge painted. And now I'm going to be painting my box. So you really only see the outside edges of the box. You don't need to paint the inside. You don't need to paint the bottom of the box. If it helps though, tip your box on its side so that the surface is facing up that needs to be painted. So then you're going to paint this entire box on the outside on all four edges. And again, I think it's easier to tip the box sideways instead of trying to paint like this. That's going to be a little more difficult to see what you're doing, so just tip it sideways. So one entire layer of the box. But what you also do want to paint is this top edge, because when your lid is sitting on top of the box, you will see that top edge. But you do not need to paint the inside or the bottom. So you would proceed to continue to paint all of those pieces. By the time you finish painting all of that box, your lid should be dry. Okay, so I'm going to set this box out of view. And this is how we clean our brushes. You're going to have a Tupperware at your table that you need to fill with water, and you just want about an inch or so of water in the bottom. The sponge, the water should not be more than halfway up the sponge. So what you're going to do is swish this around on the bottom of the Tupperware. Then you're going to paint across the top of the sponge, and that's going to pull any color left out of the brush. And then when you think your brush is clean, test it on your hand. Just paint on the back of your hand. If you see color come off on your skin, like I do, I see black on my hand, my brush is not clean yet. So I'm going to swish it around some more, paint on the sponge some more, and test it. Now that's looking better. You can always just get paper towel and wipe that off your hand, and then you can just wash your hands at the end of class. Or you can test it on paper towel, swish it around, paint on the sponge, test it on paper towel. If the paper towel doesn't have color on it, then that brush is truly, truly clean. Okay, then we're going to switch out supplies to do the color. So you're just going to set the big brush in the tray, and then please put your cap on your India ink. And then that's going to go back in this little tray. So all the India ink is getting different paint brushes from the rest of the project. So then you are going to see another tray that's got metallic paint options. And then you'll have a separate tray with paintbrushes, a variety of sizes to use for painting the color onto the surface of your box. So what we're going to be doing is creating patterns still, because remember when you carved your stamp, you created a pattern in that carving. So we want our paint to bring out the pattern design. So be thoughtful when you choose your colors so that you still see a pattern in the final design. Also, your lid should match your box so it looks like they belong together. So I have already started another lid, but to test your India ink to see if it's dry, just rub it on your hand. If nothing comes off on your hand, then your lid is dry and it's ready to be painted on. So you are going to be applying metallic paint on top of the India ink, and then you need to figure out what colors you want to see, and if you want to make a pattern with the metallic colors, or if you just want to do black in a metallic color, that's fine. So what I started was putting some gold on mine, and I decided that all the low carved areas on mine, we're going to get the gold paint. So you just have to share the paint at your table, put the cups between you and another student who wants the same color, or make a plan with the people at your table. You might say, I'm going to start with the gold, and then somebody else might say, okay, I'll wait for the gold and then I'll do green on mine until the gold is ready. But you can easily share these. So as you're painting, you want to select a paintbrush size that's appropriate for the space that you're painting. So I've got a smaller brush because I need to get in these small little corner areas. So that is allowing me to keep my paint right where I want it, instead of using the big brush. The big brush, I'm not going to be able to get that in those corners as easily. The big brush would be for wider areas that you might want painted. Then, anytime you are switching paint colors, you need to clean out your paintbrush. So you're going to use that Tupperware of water at your table to clean your brush. You're going to swish that around in water and then wipe it across the sponge to make sure your brush is clean. Also, at the very start, I would always clean your brush. I wouldn't trust that the student who used it before you cleaned it well enough, so I would always test that. Okay, then so I'm going to swish that in my water, paint that on my sponge, then I'm going to dry that on my paper towel. Alright, so the reason why we did the black first is because the black is going to sink down low in the crevices, and we want it to stay there. So I might decide that I'm going to do gold and maybe the rose gold. I don't know, this one. So I also like to kind of get my brush wet, wipe it on the sponge before I start to paint. So I'm going to do just a light coat of rose gold across the top edge. And I'm not going to force that rose gold into the corners or the cracks where that black is. I like that contrast. That shows that this was made from a stamp that had carving. So I'm just doing a light layer of just kind of brushing that rose gold just on the very, very top And this is going to kind of give your project kind of like an antique look to it, where you see that like worn effect where you've got the black down in the cracks and then the metallic just on the surface. So I'm not using a lot of paint. I'm just using a small bit of paint, and I'm just smearing that paint so it kind of has this like scratchy brushed look to it. I want to see those black ink spots into my carving. Okay. So when I grade your project, I'm grading on, did you create a pattern with your colors? So patterns have to alternate. And then I'm looking at your thoroughness. Did you thoroughly cover the clay project with your India ink? And then did you apply your metallics in a way that you still see some of that black India ink showing in the cracks, but also so that you still see a pattern. Then you're also going to want to paint the sides of your lid. You can leave them black or you can put a color there, because when your lid sits on your box, you're going to see the sides. Okay, so I have consistently made that top the rose gold color, and then I'm going to be finishing painting the bottom, the recessed, the low spots with the gold. So that's going to be my pattern, rose gold and gold. All right. So when the cleanup timer rings, you need to stop painting for today. We're going to paint for a couple of class periods, so you're not going to be able to paint everything in one period, and that's fine. So when the cleanup timer rings, first thing you need to do is swish your brush around, dry it off on the sponge, then set that in the brush tray. Then all your paint cups need to go back on this gray lid, and then you're going to store your clay project on top of your project board. You're going to carefully carry that board and go put that on your assigned shelf to dry. Then you're going to come back to your tables, make sure that all your brushes are clean, make sure